today I want to talk about how to simplify a group of trees. And what I'm doing is I'm stepping out of my studio, venturing out the front door, and I'm painting a group of Georgia pine trees that are on our property. And early in the morning, the sun comes up and it hits them just right. I mean, just beautiful bright sunlight, strong shadows. And I've been waiting to paint these for a while. So I'll be painting those this morning and then doing kind of a step-by-step and talking about what I'm thinking as far as simplifying the trees and keeping them in terms of groups of big values, big shapes, and very little detail until the very end. Matter of fact, a lot of the detail is when I get back to the studio and just touch up a few things. But 3/4 of the time, or most of the time, is spent in just organizing those big shapes. And it's 4, 5, 6 large masses that I want to get the relationship right between them. And then the detail comes a lot easier. It almost kind of happens without thinking about it because everything else has been built up from big, simple shapes. So let's go to the images here. This is the front of our property, these really nice Georgia pines. I want to zoom in a little bit more and focus right in here. I can even zoom in a bit more in my final painting, but you'll see that in a minute when I start the drawing. But the sun is coming up behind me and it's just hitting the trees. A lot of shadow still on the tree trunks, mostly sunlight, but some shadow. Now I'm going to do away with the shrubbery because they really don't have anything to do with what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the shapes of the pine trees, how it's broken up with the sky holes in here, and I have to simplify that. And the shadow pattern. There's definite shadow pattern in here that I want to get down quickly because as it changes, I don't want to have to chase the shadow shapes. I'm going to get it down right away, and then as the shadow shapes change, I can stay with what I started with. So my first image here of the painting is just toning the board. I've got a 12x9 canvas board. It's masonite with about 3 coats of gesso, and it's just burnt sienna with a little bit of blue. Sometimes I just use burnt sienna. The blue added to the burnt sienna kind of cools it slightly. It's not quite as warm as burnt sienna. And I scrub some thick areas of burnt sienna with a little blue. Then take a paper towel that's kind of damp with paint thinner and just wipe it. Doesn't matter if I get it all covered or not. I just want to get rid of most of the large white areas. It helps me judge the values better. Then, sticking with the blue and burnt sienna, I want to use that to get the big shape blocked in. And what I'm looking at here is just a silhouette. I'm not separating trees, even though it looks like I have a tree trunk here. I really don't. I'm just trying to get this shape. So it gives me the big shape of the trees and then the shape of the sky. So I'm breaking it down to just 2 shapes, shape of trees, shape of sky with the blue and burnt sienna. There's no trying to get a good drawing here in the sense of a refinement. I'm just trying to get a shape down because I want to get the dark and light shapes in there real quick. So I'm starting with the light first as far as the trees go. No tree trunks, no individual branches, no pine cones, just big shapes and masses. Now this looks pretty dark here, but that's the light. The pine trees are a real dark value, even in the light area, even when the sunlight hits them. And you can see that here in the photograph again. That's pretty dark in there. Now not as dark as the shadow, obviously the shadow's darker, but that's still a dark value, especially compared to the tree trunk. And that's what I have to do. Compare the value of the sunlit foliage with the tree trunk. And there's quite a jump. Also with the sky, there's quite a big value jump in the sky as well. So that's what I'm doing here, is just filling in. Color-wise, I'm going to gear the greens here towards phthalo blue and cad yellow. That's going to give me a stronger green than ultramarine blue and cad yellow. And I like it a little bit better than Viridian and Cad Yellow. It's a little garish with the Viridian. Phthalo Blue and Cad Yellow is a little more natural than Viridian. I also have a lot of orange in there because it isn't really a yellow green. It's more of an olive green. a lot of yellow in it and a lot of orange, and that just keeps it from being just a green, which I don't want. Again, going back to the trees here, this has an appearance of warmth to it because there's yellow in it, yellow and orange, where the shadows are going to have mostly blue. So I'm going to see more warm green, yellow green, which is really warm for the sunlight, and more just blue green for the shadows. So I want to think in those terms, warm green and cool green. And again, warm green is on the yellow green side. Has to have more yellow in it than blue. And the same with the blue green. Now I've added the shadow pattern. And again, you look at this and you think, yuck, nothing really to write home about here. But I've got the shapes the way I want them, at least the big masses. It's my shadow shape. Another shadow shape here, a few smaller ones, then the sunlit shape, and then the sky. So I actually have all the drawing down I need to do. Now I just need to break this up into smaller shapes. Now it's still pretty thin. I need to thicken the lights. So that's more the composition I'm looking at. I've really zoomed in. And again, I have no interest in the red flowers on the trees. I'm going to cut it off, kind of let the tree trunks just sink into the ground and go from there. Now I'm starting just to fill in where the tree trunks are going to be. This looks like straight white, but it's white with a lot of orange in it because I want these tree trunks to look warm. And I'm going to really emphasize the orange later. But this gives me placement. And that's all I'm looking for right now. Placement of big, light and dark green, placement of the shape of the sky, and then placement of the main tree trunks. And you have to fight that urge to be discouraged because we're keeping things as big and as simple as possible just to get it filled. And that'll make it easier later to refine things. But a lot of times we want refinement right away. And if it doesn't start to look refined, we can get kind of discouraged. Now I'm going into the sunlit areas of the foliage, and I'm going to paint it thicker. And you can see here I've got, it's phthalo blue, cad yellow, light with orange. And you can see some of it's not mixed up yet. Here's kind of the halftone, the middle value, the lights, the shadow. And I'm going to use the palette knife to mix those up into bigger piles because I need more paint on the canvas. So using the palette knife to mix it, although this is just the brush I've mixed up the shadow with, but I will use palette knife later. But that gives me big piles of paint that I can keep the brush loaded because I want to build up the lights. Down here is the color of the tree trunk. Now they aren't white tree trunks, but when the sun hits them early in the morning, they're very light and really, really warm. So I have burnt sienna, I have orange, a little bit of cad yellow, and that's going to make them warm. That's going to make it look like the sun is really blasting them. So refining it a little bit more, I'm building up. You can see the paint here in the light areas. This is too much lighter blue. That doesn't work. But that's part of the process. Put something down, doesn't quite work, just scrape it off, remix it. But as long as I keep everything big and simple, in other words, I'm not looking for tiny shapes yet, that'll come later, but I'm looking to keep things big, simple, and compare the value of the lights with the value of the shadows. And that's the only way to get the right value is to compare. Because if I just stare at the sunlit foliage of the tree and just mix and mix until I think I've matched what I'm looking at, even outside, it's not going to work. I have to mix the light foliage compared to the shadow foliage. So I'll constantly look back and forth and compare. So I'll put the dark and light down on my canvas and see if it's the right contrast on my canvas that I see up in the real tree. And sometimes I'll push it even more. Sometimes I want more contrast than what I see just to make the painting more dramatic. Nothing wrong with doing that either. So now I need to block in the sky because the sky is going to go a long way to shape up the tree. It's going to give me the sky holes. It's going to give me the value between different areas that gives the tree a sense of detail without adding a lot of detail. So the sky is kind of the negative shape behind the tree that gives the tree more shape, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. But I have two values in the sky. I got the lighter value, which the sky is always lighter at the horizon down below, bottom part of the sky, and darker at the top part of the sky. So I have phthalo blue and white for the bottom part of the sky. That's a bit warmer, which the bottom part of the sky near the horizon is a little warmer. So I will add a little orange to it. I have a pile of orange mixed up in here. And this is ultramarine blue, a little darker than the lighter part. Then over here I have alizarin crimson, and I'm going to use the alizarin crimson to scrub it around, blend it into the darker part of the sky, the top part of the sky, directly on the canvas. I'm not going to mix them together on the palette. Then I'm going to take the light orange and drag it into the bottom part of the sky. Again, directly on the canvas. I won't mix that on the palette because I want these colors to be more pure. There is a lot of orange on the horizon of the sky and more red-violet near the top of the sky. But if I blend them flat on the palette, I'm not going to have the color variation I want. And you'll see what I mean here in a minute. And here's the dark, you can see the darker blue up here and the lighter blue down in here. Phthalo blue is down below and lighter. Ultramarines on top and darker. Then you can see the alizarin crimson, where I kind of picked up a little on my brush, wiped some of it off, and just drug it around the top part. Same thing with the orange. Got some on the brush, wiped a little bit of it off, and just drug it around in the bottom part of the sky. And I'm using those values to cut into the tree and get those bigger sky holes in there. There's a lot of little tiny ones. But again, I'm trying to keep things as big and as simple as possible. I've refined the tree trunks a bit more. Got more orange and burnt sienna on them to get them a bit darker than they were, but still really warm. And pushing the coolness of the shadow on the tree trunks, which is kind of ultramarine blue and a little bit of alizarin crimson and burnt sienna is what that is. Sometimes just blue and orange is fine for a lighter shadow on a real light object like these tree trunks. But this is blue, burnt sienna with a little bit of alizarin crimson. The blue dominates though because it's shadow. Here again, just kind of refining a bit more, getting rid of some of the smaller sky holes that I didn't want. Not messing with edges yet. The edges are still kind of hard. But I am going back into the light areas, trying to get thicker paint in the lights. And I took these photos outside, so there's a little bit of glare when I get thicker. But a lot of yellow, yellow-orange, yellow-green, olive green, which is more of a yellow-green with burnt sienna in it, or orange in it. And that's what I'm just trying to vary the color slightly. And I'm going back and forth from the shadow to the light area. I'm using the shadow to cut into the light area, and then using the light area to cut into the shadow as well. So I'm going back and forth with those two shapes and values till I get the right relationship of the shapes of the dark and light. Because it's always a lot better to take the negative shape, in this case the shadow, and cut into the light. It kind of shapes it up a bit more than just trying to do just the positive shape of the light foliage. You need that dark and the sky, for that matter, too, to cut into the light areas to shape them up a bit more. And that's what I'm starting to do here. I think I spent overall an hour and a half outside on this, and then brought it inside and spent about half an hour trying to punch a few colors in, maybe find a few darker accents or lighter highlights. And you can see the thickness of the paint as we zoom in on the foliage here. And I've got a green here that's more phthalo blue in cad yellow and orange. And then I have the green, yellow-green that's more yellow and orange and a little less phthalo blue. And that gives me some variation. Then also just dragging in some light orange, yellow-orange. Got about 3 or 4 colors within the lights. Sometimes, as you can see down here, I've got a streak of straight orange or straight yellow. You can see the yellow here. When I mix the colors, sometimes I don't mix them flat. I can let a little bit of the color streak through in there. And I think that you can see a little bit of the green also. And that kind of helps color-wise. It punches the color a little bit. What I don't want to do is have streaks of white in there, because white will kill the color if it's just straight white sitting in there. So make sure your white is totally mixed up. But nothing wrong with having streaks of color showing up. It gives a little more color variation. You can see more of the orange down in here and the yellow as well. So happy accidents, I guess you could call them, but you know, it's still controlled and kind of done on purpose. Now refining the tree trunks a bit more. Tree trunks are a bit too light in the light area, so I'm going to fix that back in the studio. Refining the sky holes, getting rid of some of them that I think don't work, adding some others. When I want to add a sky hole though, I have to make sure, and again the sky hole is just the sky peeking through the green, Usually the dark green is where the sky holes peek through. But I have to clean it off pretty good. So you can see here I scraped some of the green off. I can't scrape it perfectly clean, but I can get the excess off. Then when I put the sky on that area, I'll put it on a lot thicker and it'll go on real clean. That's why the sky is so thick, because I want it to stay there and not get messed up with any of the green colors. So, and if it does get messed up, it blends too much, again, just scrape it off. Don't try and just pile more paint on a mistake or a wrong value or a dirty color. It's better just to scrape that area off and repaint it. Okay, I don't think there's much difference in this one. Again, just refining the shapes, trying to get some color variation there. I'm also looking for two values in the shadow now. You can see I've got a lighter shadow and a darker shadow. And I'm going to work up that a little bit as well. Here we find a bit more. You can see the two values in the shadow. More color variation in the light area. Got some different sky holes. I will kind of push and pull the edges a little bit. Here's me outside painting using a Soltech easel. I've had that for, gosh, quite a few years, 15 years. Works well. And just stepping out of the studio and a lot of stuff to paint. I don't have to go far. Now this is the finished painting, and you can see I went back into the tree trunks here, and this is in the studio. I've added this and just really punched the color. A lot of oranges, some permanent red. I just want some accent of color in there, really to show the strong warmth that's hitting that sunlight. Same thing in the shadow. I've got some stronger blues, a little bit of strong violet, some strong phthalo blue there. Even in the shadow of the greens, I've got stroke of Viridian. This is a violet using ultramarine blue and permanent red rose. And kind of pushed and pulled the edges on the sky holes. Try not to blend the sky and the tree color too much, but I don't want the edges too sharp. And if we zoom in a bit more at the tree trunks here, you can see I'm really pushing the color now. I have my big values, my big shapes all set up. Now I can kind of add to the painting what I think the painting needs, not just what I see all the time. So I'm back in the studio. I'm not looking at a photograph. I'm not looking at the trees themselves. I'm just adding to the painting what I think would punch it up a little bit. I'm making some of the foliage a little thicker. Also trying to follow the shape of the foliage a little bit. You can see there's kind of half rounded. Some straight, but kind of half rounded. This is all about texture and thick paint and color, as well as the big shapes and values creating the dark and light contrast. So I'm pushing the color a bit more and seeing how thick I can get things and still have it work. I'm doing a lot of negative painting, using the sky to cut in around the branches, getting some smaller branches in here. And I'm doing that with a smaller, kind of a liner brush, very long, thin bristles. I don't use them too much because they can really get you in trouble, but for small branches like that, they are really helpful. And getting some of the reflected light in the shadow on the tree trunks, and just pushing spots of color to make things pop a little bit more. Because I'm not trying to recreate reality. In other words, I'm not trying to do what the camera does, just give me an exact copy. I want to push things and make it more about the color and the intensity and kind of the drama of what I'm looking at. And I do that by pushing the color a little bit more at the end. Well, that will do it. I hope it was helpful. I want to do some more on trees, kind of a step-by-step thing. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you next time.